Welcome everybody. This is the 9th lecture in my course Purification, Ethics and Karma in Early Buddhist Discourse. Right, last time we went through 3 discourses, so I start by first reviewing them. The first was the Madhyama-āgama number 12. We had this discussion with the Vappa, follower of the giants, and the basic message that this discourse was giving us is that from an early Buddhist perspective, the fully awakened one, the Arahant, is beyond the influxes, the asavas. And we were given this simile that the situation of the Arahant is comparable to the shadow of a tree. Just once the tree is cut down and into pieces, the shadow will certainly be gone as well. And in a similar way, the Arahant is always untouched by anything that happens to the sense doors. He or she remains equanimous and mindful. This discourse has not caused any comments on the blog, but I would just like to make my own comment now. I find this simile very powerful. The sense experience is being compared to the shadow of a tree. Even when the tree is there, it's just a shadow, nothing substantial. And even that shadow is gone with full awakening. Even that assembly of something real is just completely gone. And this emphasis on equanimity and mindfulness is something that, from a practical perspective, seems to me to be of considerable importance. This is what I would see as the essence of Satipatthana meditation practice. So this simile, together with this throwing into relief these 2 qualities of the Arahant, has a very powerful impact, I think, if one considers it from a practical perspective. Then the next discourse, Madhyama-āgama number 13, was taking up 3 different views. One of these views was that everything is caused by what has been done in previous lives. The second one was that everything that one does is caused and created by a supreme divine being. And the third one is that whatever one does is without any cause of condition. So instead of these 3 views, which we could summarize as karmic determinism, Almighty Creator God, and denial of causality, instead of these 3 views, this discourse proposes insight into the 4 Noble Truths. On the blog there was an inquiry by, I think, Laura de Bernardi, if I remember correctly, about the notion of a Creator God in early Buddhism. And I thought I wanted to say a little bit about that. The denizens of ancient Indian heavens, all these gods, are part and parcel of early Buddhist discourse. The mode how these fit into early Buddhist view has been referred to as inclusivism by scholars. I just write the word here, inclusivism. In the sense that these gods are included in the Buddhist worldview, but with some rather decisive changes or shifts of perspective. So the existence of Brahma, the creator God in ancient India, is never denied. However, Brahma's claim to being a creator God or to being omniscient is in a way made fun of. We get one very nice tale in the Brahma-moods, that is the first discourse in the Digha Nikaya. So according to ancient Indian cosmological ideas, the whole universe goes through repeated cycles of expansion and contraction, or repeated cycles of destruction. So after one such period of destruction, when the whole planet Earth has disappeared and the lower Brahma worlds have also become empty, then the world starts to evolve again, and a Brahma world, an empty Brahma world, appears. And now a certain living being, in accordance with its karma and merits, is reborn in this empty Brahma world. And so he's there in this Brahma world, and well, he feels a little lonely. So he's there by himself and thinks, wouldn't it be nice if some other beings would be here? And as he keeps thinking, some other beings, in accordance with their karma and merits, are also reborn in this Brahma world. And then the one born there first thinks, look, I'm their creator. I thought, wouldn't it be nice if other beings are also here? And look, here they come. And the other beings reborn in this Brahma world think, look, he's our creator. He was there first. And then the story continues that some recluse or Brahmin, later on being reborn as a human being and going forth as a recluse and Brahmin, develops the ability to recollect past lives. This, according to early Buddhist meditation theory, it is possible to remember one's past lives once one has developed a sufficient degree of concentration, and he remembers this situation and then starts to tell others about this Creator God. This whole story obviously is making fun at a Brahminical creation myth found in the, I think, in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad somewhere. I don't have the reference now offhand here. And it shows the way early Buddhism deals with the notion of a creator God, saying that in the end it is just the outcome of somebody who is feeling lonely. Then we have another also very humorous description in another discourse also found in the Digha Nikaya, the Kesamutti-sutta. And there the story we are told is that there is a monk and he wants to know what transcends the four elements, earth, water, fire, air. What is it that goes beyond them? That's the ageless question about transcending the world. And so he has the meditative power apparently to visit the different heavens. And so we get this description how he goes from one heaven to the next, always higher, and trying to get an answer to his question, and is unable to get an answer. And he finally comes to the Brahma world, and there's many Brahmas, and they say, oh, you wait until Maha-Brahma comes, and Maha-Brahma will give you the answer. And finally Maha-Brahma appears, and the monk goes up and says, can you please tell me where earth, water, fire, and air, where these are transcended? And Maha-Brahma answers, I am the great Maha-Brahma. I know everything. I am omniscient. And the monk says, yeah, that's very nice, but that's not an answer to my question. Actually, I wanted to know about the four elements. And Maha-Brahma looks at him and says, yes, I'm Maha-Brahma. I know everything. I'm omniscient. And so this goes forth and back for a few times. And eventually Maha-Brahma realizes that he cannot get around this monk in this way, so he takes him to the side and says, look, all these other here in the Brahma world, they think I know everything and I'm the great Brahma, but so I can't frustrate them by telling you in front of them, but actually I also don't know. You are actually a fool. I mean, if you want to have an answer to this question, you better go back down on earth and ask the Buddha. He'll be able to tell you. So here we find again a very humorous tale where we see early Buddhist discourse making fun at the notion of an omniscient Brahma and at the same time clearly placing the Buddha with his knowledge highly above the god of the Brahmins, above the Mahabrahma. This way, this aspect of inclusivism, that is this kind of accepting that there is a Brahma, but in a very joking manner making clear that his claims to being a creator and to being all-knowing are not to be taken too seriously, is however only one side of the way the creator god, the ancient Indian creator god, takes part in Buddhism. There's also another Brahma. We have actually quite a number of Brahmas in the early discourses, and he has the name Sahampati, and he is a devoted disciple, a devoted supporter of Buddhism. He comes up again and again supporting the Buddha, encouraging the Buddha, telling the Buddha about Devadatta, confirming the Buddha's decision that the Buddha should only rely on his own discovery and not on another teacher. And he also features rather prominently in the Pariyesana-sutta, that is the autobiographical record of the Buddha's awakening. Here we get the story that right at the moment when the Buddha had become a Buddha, when he had reached awakening, he thought that he would not teach. It would be a vexation for him if others should not understand him. So, according to this discourse, he feels he should rather keep his discovery to himself. And our Brahma Sahampati up there in the heavens realizes what is taking place and thinking, oh gosh, the world is going to be lost. He comes down with folded hands, begs the Buddha, please teach. And it is, according to the Pariyesana-sutta, after this request only, that the Buddha surveys the world with his eye of compassion, realizes that there are some who will understand him, and thereon decides to teach. This episode is, the Brahma episode, is not found in the Madhyama-āgama parallel. Nevertheless, it is found in a large range of texts that record the Buddha's awakening. So in this case, I am myself uncertain if the Brahma episode is a later addition in all the other texts, or a loss or even a conscious removal in the Madhyama-āgama version, because the whole idea that the Buddha would not be willing to teach stands in contrast to the later notion that he had prepared himself over so many generations in his bodhisattva career to become a Buddha. Whatever the last word on this episode, if we look at it from the perspective of the Pali canonical tradition, in this instance, Brahma, the creator god Brahma, is the one who creates the occasion for Buddhism to come into being in the first place. Without Brahma, without Sahampati Brahma asking the Buddha with folded hand to teach, we would have little to talk about when we want to discuss Buddhism. And this scene of Brahma, and often accompanied by Sakra, the king of the heaven of the 33, is a very frequent representation in iconography and ancient Indian sculpture. We already have it in what is generally referred to as the aniconic period, a period where the Buddha himself was not portrayed, but only shown, his presence shown in a symbolic way. So we might get an empty throne of enlightenment, the seat of awakening, and then on the left and right side we have Brahma and Sakra standing there with folded hands. Scenes that quite probably depict this crucial moment in the history of Buddhism according to tradition. Coming to the end of my little excursion into the creator god Brahma, and I think we will get more opportunity to talk about inclusivism, Brahma and other gods during future lectures, we clearly see that although the notion that a god is responsible for the creation of the world and beings is put aside, and also the notion that God is omniscient is made fun of, the ancient Indian creator god Brahma is clearly part of the early Buddhist worldview, an integral part, and he plays a rather crucial role. Yeah, at this point I think I just stop very briefly to see if there is any question in regard to Brahma, the creator god, or what I said so far, and after that I would go into the next discourse. Good, then I continue reviewing in the next discourse. That was the discourse to Rahula, Madhyama-āgama number 14, and the main theme of falsehood has been very much discussed with very interesting contributions in the blog. I just quickly go through the similes we had. There were these altogether 5 similes to illustrate the problem of speaking falsehood. We had the Buddha using a water vessel, with which he apparently had just washed his feet. So the first simile found in both versions, he shows that there is very little water left, and so it's kind of useless. And the second simile is about discarded water. The water is being thrown out, so it's also useless. Then the third simile in the Madhyama-āgama, the vessel is just tipped over. In the Majjhima Nikaya, is put upside down. And the fourth vessel, then in the Madhyama-āgama, we get the upside down vessel, and in the Majjhima Nikaya, the empty vessel. And following on these water vessel illustrations, we also get the image of an elephant that protects his trunk, and then afterwards he's given up any fear and doesn't even protect his trunk. He's using his trunk even in a battle situation, showing that one who speaks evil will be willing, one who speaks a falsehood, one who speaks falsehood will be willing to do any evil. And I think this pronouncement has really caused some controversies and some discussion. There's a nice contribution by Michael Dove. Michael Dove says, "My reading is that a small offense, like a small lie, carries the potential seed and perhaps unwittingly also waters the ground for a serious offense." I think this very succinctly captures the image that we get with this simile of the elephant. And then there's a very insightful comment from Manfred Wiesberger. He said, "The most harmful aspect about not being truthful is lying to oneself. And each little white lie increases the tendency to untruthfulness, dishonesty, and insincerity." And a similar comment made by Robert Grosch. "The most severe harm is that one clouds one's own view, or maybe one's own vision, and prevents oneself from seeing and accepting the truth." I think these two comments clearly point out the reason why early Buddhism is so severe or so much concerned with the speaking of truth and the avoiding of falsehood, because the principle is that in order for a lie to be convincing, now if I want to tell you now something falsely, something untrue, and I obviously want you to believe it, and in order to be believable for at least a moment, I have to pretend to myself that I'm also believing it. I have to pretend to myself it's true what I'm saying. Only then I will be able to really tell it in a way that is convincing. So every time I am speaking a falsehood, I am actually training myself to do the very opposite of what the whole enterprise of meditation, etc. is about seeing things as they really are. I'm training myself consciously to see things not as they really are, different from what they really are. I'm training myself in self-deception. So this obviously goes diametrically in the opposite direction, opposite to where, according to early Buddhist soteriology, we are supposed to go. And the point is also, is there anybody who really wants to do evil from the depth of his or her heart? Maybe a few, but most people from the depth of their heart, I presume, would not really want to do evil, but rather when they're doing something evil, there is a moment of dishonesty with oneself. One pretends it's okay to do it, or one does it very quickly in order to pass by the stage of reflection. This crucial moment of honestly reflecting on the nature of a deed, of what we are about to do, what we are doing, what we have done, as the Rahulavada Sutta teaches us, is so crucial. And speaking falsehood is undermining that whole pattern, that whole construction. Falsehood is also very important in the training of Buddhist monastics. In fact, it's kind of assumed in Vinaya regulations that a monk will not speak a lie. Professor von Hinüber, who has done a lot of studies on Vinaya texts and has given us a whole range of insightful publications, he says the following. Let me just paste it in. One of the basic principles of early Buddhist law, as laid down in the Patimokkha, is that the monk involved has to admit his intention to commit an offense. Speaking the truth is taken more or less for granted here, as in the Brahminical tradition, where it is thought that Brahmins speak the truth by their very nature. Much of our Vinaya regulations of dealing with a monk who has done something bad is actually based on getting him to admit it. And this is so crucial to the whole procedure that applying the same in modern day world, we would probably not stand much chances of getting our regulations to work. And on the other side, if somebody has done something evil and he or she tries to conceal it, I'm talking about monastics now, and it is found out that they have spoken falsehood, then this person has pretty much kind of lost all respect that he or she could expect normally from his co-monks or co-nuns. So in the case of a monk, then he will be pronounced to be a monk of evil character for having spoken falsehood. And when a monk has been determined to be of evil character, then he will be divested of all possible privileges. He will not be allowed to have a novice as his attendant. He will not be allowed to give teachings to nuns. He will not be allowed to take a place of honor or benefit from any community decision. He pretty much has exonerated himself to such an extent that he's no longer able to fulfill the role of a normal monk. He is still a bhikkhu. It's not a parajika, but still it's a very severely offense that he has done by just speaking falsehood. Just, I'm saying, from the modern day perspective. So speaking of falsehood, particularly when being interrogated by other monks, was seen as a rather grave wrongdoing. And on the opposite side, excuse me, that's again something already pointed out by Manfred Wiesberger, we have this notion of a statement of truth. This is not specifically Buddhist, it's a general ancient Indian notion that by making a statement of truth, there's a certain power, and even magical power, that can be used to influence things. An example of this statement of truth in a Buddhist discourse we find in the Angulimala tale, Angulimala-sutta. There, the former murderer Angulimala has become a monk, and he goes down the road and sees a woman in difficult labor. And so when he comes back and tells the Buddha tells him, you make a statement of truth. And on making a statement of truth, the woman will be delivered. And so when he makes his statement of truth, which is actually a little ambivalent in its formulation, but basically he says that according to the Pali version, since my noble birth I have not harmed any living being. He has been a murderer, but the noble birth then is meant to refer to his being a monk. So he makes a declaration of truth that I have been a murderer before, but since I've become a monk, I have not harmed anyone. This may be also a statement meant to let people in town know that he has really changed himself. And this statement of truth has not only helped that woman in labor, but it's still a protective chant used nowadays in the Theravada tradition, the Angulimala Paritta. So there is a certain power, and maybe we need not believe in the magical aspects of the statement of truth. We could still see that there is a certain power that goes with speaking the truth and not speaking falsehood. However, there's another comment here by Sergio Guillermo Canova. He says, according to Buddhism, are we supposed to tell the truth or just not tell deliberate lies? And that is a very good point. I was very glad that Sergio came up with this point. Yeah, and I think the thing is that we have this commitment to not saying something false, but truth is something that needs to be considered if it's the right time and the right circumstances to speak it. There's a nice example in the Vinaya. There's a story of, excuse me, soon after the Buddha had become awakened, and he had taught the first 5 monks, and there's a layman he meets, Yasa. Yasa has run away from home and come to meet the Buddha, and so he sits there and the Buddha gives him a discourse, and Yasa becomes a stream enterer. Now next, father comes into the scene. He's desperately looking for the son. Yasa was apparently from a very rich family, and so their parents are perhaps afraid that he had been kidnapped or something untoward has happened to him. Now the Buddha has, through a feat of magical power, has hidden Yasa so that the father cannot see him. Now the father, according to the Pali Vinaya account, walks up to the Buddha and says, "Have you seen my son Yasa?" Now we have this distressed father who is worried that his son might be dead, might be kidnapped. What the Buddha does is he says, "You sit down here. If you sit down here, you might see Yasa sooner or later." See, he is not speaking the truth. I'm sorry. He's not saying, "Yes, Yasa is just sitting here behind the corner. I've just been talking to him, don't worry." No, he just told him, "You just sit here and wait." Then obviously he gives him a discourse. The householders, the father of Yasa becomes a stream enterer, and doing that same discourse, Yasa, then I think he becomes an arahant. And then the Buddha retreats his feat of magical power and makes Yasa visible. Even if we don't believe in the feat of magical power, perhaps Yasa has been just sitting around the corner, the story would still function. See my point? The Buddha is a fully awakened one. He is not forced to blurt out the truth. To say, well, somebody asks where is Yasa, and he just has to he's forced to say Yasa is sitting here, there. There is the possibility of evaluating the situation, and I assume the idea behind the story is that the Buddha knew if they now meet, Yasa will not progress further, the father will not get streamed into, but if I can stop the father here, and I am able to allay his fear by telling me you're going to see your son, he's going to be receptive to a discourse, and that discourse is going to be good for him, and Yasa is also going to be progressing further. So presumably on assessing the whole situation, he decides not to tell the truth. He doesn't say a falsehood, but he also doesn't say the truth. And I think that's quite a nice story to show the early Buddhist attitude towards the speaking of truth. And because this, excuse me again, a little cough today, because this whole issue of speaking falsehood and truth has been so much discussed on the blog, I would like to go into a few more passages, because I believe this is a rather important issue. So the first passage I like to take up is from the Abhaya-raja-kumara-sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 58. What type of speech would the Buddha use? And so the presentation we get distinguishes from three different perspectives, or three categories for evaluation. I have called them here in my handout. One is this speech, is it false or is it true? The second one, is it unbeneficial or is it beneficial? And the third one, is it pleasant or unpleasant? And so we get these 6 different cases. And before we get into them, I already like to mention that the distinction unpleasant or pleasant makes no difference. This is not really a criterion. The others are criteria, but whether it is pleasant or unpleasant is not a criteria for deciding the type, whether this speech can be used or not. Therefore, I have put the variations unpleasant, pleasant always together so that we just get 3 different cases. The first case, speech that is false and unbeneficial. The Buddha would not use such speech. This is, nota bene, the only case of false speech. There is no false speech that is beneficial. This is simply not considered in this analysis there. I think there was there some example on the blog of somebody wanting to, I think from Robert, I don't remember exactly. I went through the blog before the lecture, but there were so many interesting things that I don't have it all in my mind. But I think Robert made this example of somebody wanting to kill another person and then asking us where that person is, and we have to tell a falsehood to save that other person, something of that type. This possibility of speaking a falsehood that is beneficial because it saves a human being's life is simply not considered here. We get only false, unbeneficial, unpleasant, false, unbeneficial, pleasant. Both such type of speeches the Buddha won't use. Then the second category we get true but unbeneficial. Again, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, the Buddha would not use it. And we get the third case, true, beneficial, unpleasant. The Buddha will know the time when to use it. True, beneficial, pleasant, again, the Buddha will know the time. Kālānyu, know the time. Even it's true, even it's beneficial, not just blurt it out. Watch circumstances, know when it's time to speak it, know when it's time not to speak it. Another passage I like to touch on is from Anguttara Nikaya. It's among the fours, discourse number 100. And it's an examination of 4 different cases. The first is you criticize what deserves criticism. The second is you praise what deserves praise. The third is you neither criticize what deserves criticism nor praise what deserves praise. And the fourth is you criticize what deserves criticism and you praise what deserves praise. By the way, you might remember last time I spoke about this tetralemma. This is again this tetralemma type of presentation. Yes, no, neither, yes, no, no, yes, and no. Anyhow, the point that this discourse makes is which of these three options is the best? What would you say? What is the best? Criticize only what deserves criticism without praising? Praising what deserves praise without criticizing? Just keeping completely quiet, or doing both? Any suggestions? Both. I would say it depends on the situation, but in general both, says Robert, and Hedwig has also said both. Yeah, both, but at times not speak at all. Yeah, well done. Yeah, both is the you hit the right solution. That is the solution the Buddha proposes. And his visitor had said that in principle it's better not to say anything. He had chosen the option 3 because that, according to the visitor, shows extreme equanimity. And the Buddha disagrees, and he says, as you all said, I mean, sometimes 3 might be right, but in principle both is the right option because it shows one knows the proper time. One knows the proper time when something deserves criticism, one will criticize. When something deserves praise, one will praise. And I think if we look at it from that perspective of the proper time, it will also include the point that made by both of you, that it depends somewhat on the situation. But in principle, to just simply say nothing, assuming that this is equanimity, is criticized by the Buddha. Thank you for joining me in this. Yeah, and then here, just to put a counterpart to this and to confirm also the suggestion made by both of you that it depends on the situation. At times one should not speak at all. This is also correct, and we find that here in the Kinti-sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 103, when should we criticize someone? And this discourse gives us 3 categories for evaluation. This is the situation as among monastics. Somebody has done an offense or transgression, and should we reprove him? But I think we can apply this in general also to laity. We need not restrict it to monks. So there's three aspects that should be considered before we decide to intervene. The first is, will I be troubled? The second is, will the other get upset? And the third, or C, will it be possible to establish the other person in what is wholesome? Obviously, if I'm not going to get troubled, if the other is not going to get upset, and if the other is probably going to be established in what is wholesome, then full way ahead, we criticize. Even if it means that I get troubled, even if the other gets upset, you still speak. However, if one anticipates that, and now I'm quoting from the sutta, I cannot make that person emerge from the unwholesome and establish him in the wholesome. One should not underrate equanimity towards such a person. I think that confirms the point made by both of you there, that there are times when one should keep quiet. Yeah, then we had this mirror simile in Madhyama-āgama 14 to illustrate reflection And this reflection should be done in regard to bodily, verbal and mental action. And it should be done before the action, during the action and after the action. And as I said before, there is this close relationship to the speaking of falsehood in a way because of this need of honesty. The danger will always be to pretend to ourselves that it's not so bad or I needed to do it. But instead, just as a mirror a proper mirror does not change the image, does not interpret it, but simply reflects what is there. So mindfulness should be the mirror that simply reflects what is there so that we are able to recognize its wholesome or unwholesome nature and repercussions. It's a very nice comment made by Laura de Bernardi. She says, the specificity of the instructions to Rahula to attend to actions before, during and afterwards suggests the attentiveness and dedication, diligence and discipline one must bring to sila. This specificity seems to me like the meter in poetry. Many a poet has risen to great heights because they couldn't use 30 syllables in a line, as the meter was such that only 15 syllables could be used. The constriction itself was a factor in their creativity. I find that I really appreciate that image. It shows us that the restriction by keeping to certain rules of sila can actually have a very positive effect. Can make us more creative than if we just do whatever comes to our mind without any kind of restraint or concern. And then there's another comment again by Manfred Wiesberger. I'm making a lot of use of his wisdom in today's lecture. He says, it seems to be typical in Western societies to focus on the negative aspects of something. So I'm not surprised that up to now nobody has commented on the idea in the sutta of rejoicing about one's pure actions. How about not doing evil, but doing good in body, speech and mind, and thus filling the space where unwholesomeness could creep in? And that is also a very, very good point that shows us the importance of positive reflection, rejoicing in the positive sides of our bodily, verbal and mental actions before, during and after. Yeah, this was basically my review of those 3 discourses we had last time. Unless there are any questions or comments on what I have covered so far, I would go to the next discourse. Yeah, the next discourse, the next 2 discourses are both rather tricky from the viewpoint of oral transmission. In the present case, I have the rather strong impression that something went wrong with the Pāli Parallel. And the next one, parallel to the Kālāmas Sutta, I am under the impression that something went wrong with the Madhyama-āgama version. Both cases we have considerable differences, and this is gives us an idea of what sometimes can happen, because most of the discourses we have seen so far were in relatively close agreement, except sometimes little changes in the sequence. So this discourse is parallel to the Karajakāya-sutta, among the 10s of the Anguttara Nikaya. Well, I start by reading the first part. Thus have I heard. At one time, the Buddha was staying at Savatthi in Jetas Grove, Anathapindika's park. At that time, the Blessed One told the monks, if a person does an action intentionally, then he will have to experience its results, either in this life or in the next life. I say, if a person does an action unintentionally, then he will not have to experience the result. I say. Now the Anguttara Nikaya parallel starts quite differently. The first is similar, the difference comes in the second part. So the first is, I do not say, monks, that without being experienced, there is a coming to an end of intentional deeds that have been undertaken and accumulated. And this is with slightly different words, saying the same as the Madhyama-āgama version, and is in full accordance with what we find in other early Buddhist discourse on the relationship between karma and its fruit. As you would already know, such statements need to be contextualized. We saw the discourse on the piece of salt telling us that just as a same piece of salt has a different effect depending on whether it is thrown into a small cup of water or into a whole large river full of water. So a particular deed, the effects of a particular deed depend on the overall moral development of the person who has done this deed. However, whether it is the small cup of the river, the salt will have an effect on making the water salty, even though in the river we will not be able to taste it. But perhaps with some modern scientific method we would still be able to prove that the water has become so and so milli% more salty. Similarly, the effects of the deed will definitely be experienced. Now we come to the second part of the Anguttara Nikaya passage. It says, yet monks, I do not say that there is a making an end of dukkha without having experienced the fruits of intentional deeds that have been undertaken and accumulated. And I'm also giving you the Pāli of this passage. Natvevahang bhikkhave sanchitanikanang kammanang kattanang upachitanang apatisang viditva dukkhas antakiryang vadami. This passage has been a continuous puzzle for many of us. Bhikkhu Bodhi told me that already his teacher Venerable Jnana Ponika was puzzled by it, and I was puzzled by it, and we just simply don't know how to make sense of it. If the making an end of dukkha requires experiencing all the fruits of our intentional deeds from the past, which we know samsara is beginningless, then it seems impossible to ever make an end of it. This position that all the fruits have to inevitably be experienced and thereby be annihilated in order to reach liberation is a position held attributed to the Jaina tradition. In discourses like the Devadaha-sutta, which we will come to shortly, we are told that this is the idea underlying the undertaking of ascetic practices by Jaina monks and nuns, believing that all of the karmic retribution of our past has to be expiated. This is not the Buddhist tradition. In fact, we are told that the purpose of living the life as a monk or a nun in Buddhism is not to alter or eradicate karmic retribution, but to develop insight into the Four Noble Truths. I'm giving you the passage for that, and I'm also reading it out now. This is Anguttara Nikaya 9, the 13th Discourse, Volume 4, page 382 to 385 of the PTS edition. And nature of the early Buddhist conception of the relationship between karma and liberation can very nicely be illustrated by the tale of the murderer Angulimala, whom I had already mentioned earlier. Now, Angulimala, as I said, he killed a number of people. Then he was converted by the Buddha, he became a monk, and he became an arahant. So the retribution of his killing could not have been exhausted in that short period of time. And the retribution of all this killing is still there awaiting to his fruition. But Angulimala was able to escape that fruition because he had become an arahant and thus was not going to be reborn. That is, that stack of, I think it's 100 people that he killed, or however many is that stack of killings, the karmical effect some of it was going to happen in that same lifetime. And it did indeed happen. He got beaten up when he went begging in town by some of those whose relatives had been killed by him when he was a murderer before. And when he came back with a bleeding head and torn robes and broken bowl, the Buddha said, bear it. These are the fruits of your evil deeds. Bear it patiently. But the presumably much more severe retributions for his killings that were awaiting him after his passing away, where he should have been reborn in hell to suffer, he had cut that off because he had become an arahant. So the point is that from an early Buddhist perspective, it is definitely not the case that, as we are told here, I do not say that there's a making an end of dukkha without having experienced the fruits of intentional deeds that have been undertaken and accumulated. I will come back to this difference again towards the end of going through the Madhyama-āgama discourse, but I had just wanted to make you aware of this rather puzzling statement in the Pali version, which I believe to be the result of a transmission error. Not only this statement, but also when we continue now in Madhyama-āgama, we get a description of the overcoming of that leads up to the overcoming of the hindrances and the radiation of loving kindness. All this is also not found in the Anguttara Nikaya Parallel, but it's found in a comparable fashion in the two preceding discourses in the Anguttara collection. I've in fact published a paper in which I translate Madhyama-āgama 15 and try to sort out all these problems, because somehow it seems that a transmission error has resulted in creating three different discourses, this Anguttara Nikaya 208 and the two preceding ones. There seems to be like a split, a loss of text, a split, and leading to these three different discourses, all of which have this puzzling statement. This is again one of these articles which I am not allowed to put out on the internet, but any of you who wishes to read that can just do like last time, send me an email to that Madhyama-āgama email account, and I'll send you the PDF of the article under the provision that you just keep it for yourself and don't spread it out. Anyway, let us now first continue with the Madhyama-āgama version. I'm reading the text again. In this connection, there are three intentionally done bodily actions that are unwholesome, have dukkha as their fruit, and result in the experience of dukkha. There are four intentionally done verbal actions and three intentionally done mental actions that are unwholesome, have dukkha as their fruit, and result in the experience of dukkha. What are the three intentionally done bodily actions that are unwholesome, have dukkha as their fruit, and result in the experience of dukkha? Now we get into the 10 pathways of action, Kammapada in Pali. These are 10 types of actions that are singled out for their karmic potency. The first is killing living beings. Someone is extremely evil and bloodthirsty, has the desire to harm, has no compassion towards any kind of living beings, including insects. This is a notable difference recurrently found in Madhyama-āgama discourses, that in descriptions of killing living beings there is an explicit mention to insects. We do not get the mention of insects in Pali discourses, but only in the Pali Vinaya. I continue with the discourse. The second is taking what is not given. Someone has attachment to another's property and with thieving intent takes it. The third is sexual misconduct. Someone has sexual relations with a woman who is under the protection of her father, or under the protection of her mother, or under the protection of her clan, or with a woman who is married to another man, in spite of the fear of being punished, or with a woman who has been garlanded as a sign of betrothal. Just another remark, it is interesting that sexual misconduct in the early Buddhist discourse is always described from the perspective of a male. I find this rather noticeable, and last week I was at the IAPS conference in Taiwan, and scholar Alice Collette, she's working on women in early Buddhism. She has gathered all passages relating to female sexuality and has shown that wherever this topic comes up, the text always shows the male as the aggressor. Found that rather significant counterbalance of the stereotype that we get in some discourses that women are always interested in sex. It seems that the texts themselves rather show the opposite. Just as an aside on this topic. Continuing with the discourse. What are the four intentionally done verbal actions that are unwholesome, have dukkha as their fruit, and result in the experience of dukkha? The first is false speech. Someone, on being told, "Say what you know," claims to know what he does not know, or claims not to know what he does know, claims to have seen what he has not seen, or claims to have seen what he did see. Claims not to have seen what he did see, be it for his own sake, or for the sake of others, or for the sake of profit. He knowingly speaks falsehood. The second is divisive speech. Someone wishes to divide others. Hearing something from this person, he tells it to that person in order to harm this person. Hearing something from that person, he tells it to this person in order to harm that person. He desires to divide those who are united, and to further split those who are already divided. He creates factions, delights in factions, and praises factions. The third is harsh speech. Someone utters speech that is rough and rude in tone, offensive words that grate on the ear, that people neither enjoy nor desire. He utters such speech as causes others dukkha and vexation, that is not conducive to concentration. The fourth is frivolous speech. Someone makes talk that is untimely, untrue talk, meaningless talk, talk that is contrary to the Dharma, that is not calming. Furthermore, he praises what is not conducive to calming, and teaches and admonishes others in untimely and unwholesome way. What are the three intentionally done mental actions that are unwholesome, have dukkha as their fruit, and result in the experience of dukkha? The first is covetousness. Someone views another's wealth and lifestyle, constantly longing for them and wishing, "If only I could get that." The second is ill will. Someone's mind is filled with ill will, and he thinks those beings should be killed, bound, arrested, removed, banished. His wish is for them to experience immeasurable dukkha. The third is wrong view. Someone holds distorted views such as these, tenets such as these. There is no offering, no sacrifice. There are no incantations, no wholesome or unwholesome actions, no results of wholesome or unwholesome actions. There is neither this world nor another world. There are no father and mother. There are no true persons in the world who are headed for a supreme attainment, who are well gone and well directed, who have known and realized for themselves this world and the other world, and to dwell having personally realized it. Here's again a comment I like to make. One thing is there's no offering, no sacrifice, no incantation. Ati-yittang, huttang we have in Pali, it's the same. It's just something I do not understand. Why wrong view, denial of the efficacy of sacrifice, right view, the affirmation of Brahminical sacrifice? Why this is Buddhist right view is something I have so far not been able to understand. The second is that in the Pali version we also have the affirmation or negation of the existence of spontaneously arisen beings. Satta Upapadika. These are devas or other celestial beings who take birth not from a womb but by spontaneous appearance. According to the Pali version standard description of wrong view is to deny their existence, right view is to affirm their existence. So those of you who do not believe in gods and devas and celestial beings, be reassured, according at least to the Madhyama-āgama version, you are not holding wrong views. And another thing I just like to explain, there is no father, there is no mother. This is a short, abbreviated statement. It obviously does not mean the denial of the physical fact that we are born from a mother who has had a relationship with the father, but it rather means there is no responsibility towards one's parents. There is no obligation towards one's parents. Okay, I continue with the Madhyama-āgama version. A learned noble disciple abandons unwholesome bodily actions and practices wholesome bodily actions. He abandons unwholesome verbal and mental actions and practices wholesome verbal and mental actions. That learned disciple abandons ill will and quarrel, discards sloth and torpor, is without restlessness and conceit. He cuts off doubt. He transcends arrogance, has right mindfulness and right attentiveness, and is without confusion. With a mind imbued with loving kindness, he dwells pervading one direction, likewise the second, the third, and the fourth direction, and also the four intermediate directions, above and below, all around, everywhere. With a mind imbued with loving kindness, free from fetters or resentment, without ill will or quarrel, he dwells pervading the entire world with a mind that is boundless, exalted, immeasurable, and well cultivated. He thinks, formerly my mind was narrow and not well cultivated. Now my mind is immeasurable and well cultivated. If the learned noble disciple, whose mind is now thus immeasurable and well cultivated, had earlier been negligent because of bad friends and done unwholesome actions, then he will no longer be led along by them. They cannot corrupt him and will not accompany him further. Suppose there were a young boy or a young girl who, since birth, had been able to practice liberation of the mind through loving kindness. Would he or she later perform unwholesome action? The monks replied, "No, Blessed One." "And why not?" "Since he or she has never done an evil deed, how could evil deeds arise?" The Buddha continued, "Therefore, a man or woman, whether lay person or recluse, should always diligently practice liberation of the mind through loving kindness. If that man or woman, whether lay person or recluse, practices liberation of the mind through loving kindness, since, when going towards the other world, he or she will not take this body along, he or she will proceed just in accordance with the developed quality of their mind. Monks, you should think like this. Formerly I was negligent and did unwholesome deeds. Let all their results be experienced now, not in the next life." Just an aside, this injunction is not found in the Pali version. I continue. "One who practices liberation of the mind through loving kindness in this way, immeasurable and well cultivated, will definitely attain the fruit of non-returning, or else attain that which is still higher." Then the text goes through the same description for compassion, empathic joy or sympathetic joy, and equanimity. Now I like to come back to the difficult passage that I mentioned before. And after this difficult passage, before coming to the radiation of loving kindness, etc., the Anguttara Nikaya discourse continues like this. It says, "That noble disciple, monks, in this way, free from covetousness, ill will, and delusion." I have given the Pali also. "Sankhoso bhikkhave arya savako evaṁ vigata bhijjo vigata vyapado asammulo." Now this reference to that noble disciple hangs in the air, because in the Anguttara Nikaya version so far a noble disciple has not been mentioned at all. Therefore, my impression is that a piece of text has been lost here. In fact, Woodward, the PTS translator of Anguttara Nikaya, has a note on this passage, and he says, "All this is introduced without any apparent reason, thus suddenly." Means that in the Madhyama-āgama version, the initial statement on the retribution for karmic deeds then gets an illustration through the detailed exposition of the 10 unwholesome actions, the karmapata. And after that we get the opposite, the noble disciple who abstains from these, develops the Brahma Viharas. There's a logical sequence in the exposition. And I believe that the Karajakāya-sutta has suffered in transmission. It has lost this whole part, which has become part of the other two discourses in Anguttara Nikaya that preceded. And I believe that there also could have happened something to the actual statement. And here I propose a very simple solution. Before I come to my solution, I should also mention that the Karajakāya-sutta now is among the tenets of the Anguttara Nikaya, but it has no tenets. The point of putting a discourse in the section on tenets is that it should have some item that counts up to 10 of this or 10 of that. And the 10 would in fact be the 10 pathways of action, the 10 Kammapata, but as they are not found in the Anguttara Nikaya, there is no meaning in placing this Anguttara Nikaya version among the 10s. And I think this placement confirms my suspicion that an exposition on the 10 pathways of action has been lost at some point. Later than after the discourse had already been placed among the 10s of the Anguttara Nikaya. There's a problem that can easily happen in transmission because regarding negations. You see, in the Indic languages, Sanskrit and Pali, the way to say no is simply to put an a before something. So a lecture, if I don't give a lecture, it's an a lecture, or a not house is an a house. You just put an a, like my name, actually Alaya, and then my name is actually Alaya, the not Alaya, and then there's just an n put in between because two r's together that doesn't work. One recognizes. So Anālayo. There's always this pattern of just putting an a before something in order to get a negation. And the problem is also that these Indic languages usually the words do not come one by one, but they come together, and there's something we call sandhi, where if one word ends in a vowel and the next word starts in a vowel, then these two vowels kind of combine and one of them can disappear. So in my experience of excuse me, working with especially with Chinese translations, I have found several cases where I think a negation has been lost or has been added by mistake. And because of this recurrent pattern of negations being lost or added, I propose that the difficult statement we have in the Anguttara Nikaya could also be the outcome of a confusion of negation. So here I'm giving you first the statement as we have it in the original, where it says, I do not say that there is a making an end of dukkha without having experienced ap-patisangviditva, without having experienced intentional deeds, etc. And now if instead of this ap-patisangviditva, we just forget about the negation, we just have patisangviditva, then we get the statement, yet monks, I do not say that there's a making an end of dukkha through having experienced the fruits of intentional deeds that have been undertaken and accumulated. And suddenly we are full-fledged within the scope of early Buddhist doctrine on karma. It makes full sense. It is the opposite of the Jain view, and it also fits the remainder of the discourse. It sets, in fact, the whole discourse ends with the attainment of non-return or full awakening, and makes it very clear that experiencing of intentional needs is not a necessary condition to be fulfilled in order to reach awakening. Yeah, I presented my arguments here very shortly. As I said before, if you have the patience and interest to get all the details, then let me know and I'll be happy to send you the full paper. Leaving aside our problems with oral transmission errors, the main points that we get are the description of these 10 pathways of actions. I've listed them here again: killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, false speech, malicious speech, harsh speech, gossiping, covetousness, ill will, and wrong views. And in contrast, overcoming the hindrances, cultivating the 4 divine abodes, the Brahma Vihara, loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. And these lead to a good rebirth and to non-return or arahantship. Yeah, I have still 15 minutes time. I still owe you 5 minutes from last time, but maybe I keep accumulating my debt and still hit the next discourse, because it's kind of a contrast where I think the Madhyama-āgama version has not preserved everything properly. Unless there is a question now. Yeah, then let me go into the Madhyama-āgama parallel to the Kālāmas-sutta, and based on what happens on the blog, I can review these 2 discourses in more detail during the next session. So the Kālāmas-sutta is a very famous discourse, often quoted to show a very specific Buddhist attitude, a charter of free inquiry, sometimes so called, and you will probably be rather disappointed to find that the Chinese version does not give us this type of charter of free inquiry. So I read the discourse. Thus have I heard. At one time the Buddha, who was wandering in the territory of the Kālāmas together with a great company of monks, having arrived at Kesamutti-sutta, was staying in a rosewood grove north of Kesamutti. Next we get a description of how the Kālāmas hear about the good reputation of the Buddha and they decide to visit him. I get a teaching by the Buddha, and now I continue with the discourse. Then the Kālāmas, having been taught Dharma by the Buddha, having been exhorted, encouraged and delighted, rose from their seats, arranged their clothes so as to bear one shoulder, saluted the Buddha by placing their palms together, and said to the Blessed One, Gautama, some recluse or Brahmin approaches us Kālāmas and just praises what he himself has come to know and see, while denouncing and disparaging what others have come to know and see. And then, Gautama, another recluse or Brahmin approaches us Kālāmas and also praises what he himself has come to know and see, while denouncing and disparaging what others have come to know and see. Gautama, having heard this, we have come to doubt which of these recluses or Brahmins is right and which is wrong. The Blessed One told them, Kālāmas, do not doubt. Why? When there is doubt, hesitation arises. Yeah, the Anguttara version is considerably different at this point. The Buddha actually tells them that they should doubt, that they are entitled to doubt. I continue with the Madhyama-āgama a little further. Kālāmas, you yourself do not have clear knowledge about whether there is a next life or whether there is no next life. Kālāmas, you yourself also do not have clear knowledge about what action is an offense and what action is not an offense. So the Anguttara Nikaya version, instead, as I said, the Buddha acknowledges that there is good reason for them to have doubt, as they have doubts in regard to something which is really doubtful, a doubtful matter. And then the Buddha continues by listing different sources of knowledge. He mentions oral tradition, a lineage of teachings, hearsay, a particular collection of scriptures, logical reasoning, inferential reasoning, reflection on reasons, acceptance of a view after pondering, seeming competence of a speaker, and liking one's teacher. None of these are mentioned in the Chinese version. And then there comes the famous dictum, the Charter of Free Inquiry. When you know for yourself, these things are unwholesome, these things are blamable, these things are censored by the wise. These things, if undertaken practice, lead to harm and suffering, then you should abandon them. Not found in the Madhyama-āgama version. Madhyama-āgama version continues. Kālāmas, you should know that all actions have three causes, sources, roots, causal conditions. What are the three? Again, different style of teaching. And Buddha just tells them what's happening. In the Anguttara Nikaya, he inquires. He says, is lobha, desire, is it for someone's benefit or not? And the Kālāmas always reply, it's not for one's benefit. Here, he just gives a straight teaching without any interrogation. I continue with that straight teaching. Kālāmas, desire is a cause, a source, a root, a causal condition of actions. Kālāmas, hatred and ignorance are causes, sources, roots, causal conditions of actions. Kālāmas, someone who has desire becomes overwhelmed by desire. Their mind is never satisfied. Such a one may kill living beings, or take what is not given, or engage in sexual misconduct, or knowingly speak falsehood, or drink intoxicating liquor. Side remark again by me, the reference to the intoxicating liquor is not mentioned in the Anguttara Nikaya. Again, this is a recurrent pattern that the Chinese Agamas more frequently refer to the need to refrain from alcohol than Pali discourses. This is also mentioned sometimes in Pali discourses, but not as frequently as in the Chinese Agamas. I continue with the Madhyama-āgama version. Kālāmas, someone who has hatred becomes overwhelmed by hatred, and we get the full passage. And Kālāmas, someone who is ignorant becomes overwhelmed by ignorance, and again we get the full passage that because of being overwhelmed by ignorance may kill living beings, etc. Now we get the opposite. Kālāmas, a learned noble disciple abstains from killing, gives up killing, discards blade and cudgel. He has shame and scruple, and a mind full of loving kindness and compassion, wishing to benefit all beings, including insects. He purifies his mind with regard to killing living beings. Yeah, again, the Anguttara Nikaya version is different. Here, this is all a question and answer kind of thing. Continue with the Madhyama-āgama. Kālāmas, a learned noble disciple abstains from taking what is not given, from sexual activity, from false speech, from divisive speech, from harsh speech, from frivolous speech, from covetousness, from hatred, and from wrong view. In this manner, Kālāmas, a learned noble disciple achieves purity of bodily actions, achieves purity of verbal and mental actions. With a mind imbued with loving kindness, he dwells pervading one direction, likewise the second, third, and the fourth direction, and also the four intermediate directions, above and below, all around, everywhere. With a mind imbued with loving kindness, free from fetters and resentment, without ill will or quarrel, he dwells pervading the entire world with a mind that is boundless, exalted, immeasurable, and well cultivated. It is the same with compassion, empathic joy, and equanimity. In this way, Kālāmas, the mind of a learned noble disciple is free from fetters and resentment, without ill will or quarrel, and he obtains 4 assurances. What are the 4? 1. He thinks, if there is this world or another world, if there are results of wholesome and unwholesome actions, then, upholding and being endowed with his right view and action in conformity with it, at the breaking up of the body after my death, I will certainly go to a good realm of existence and be reborn in a heavenly realm. Thus, Kālāmas, this is the first assurance obtained by a learned noble disciple, whose mind is free from fetters and resentment, without ill will or quarrel. Again, Kālāmas, if there is neither this world nor another world, if there are no results of wholesome and unwholesome actions, then in this case, in this lifetime, I am not censored by others for this belief, but am praised for having right attentiveness as one who is diligent, who is said to have right view. Thus, Kālāmas, this is the second assurance obtained by a learned noble disciple, whose mind is free from fetters and resentment, without ill will or quarrel. Again, Kālāmas, whatever I have done, I have certainly done no evil, and I recollect no evil. Why? Since I have done no evil, whence could dukkha arise? Thus, Kālāmas, this is the third assurance, etc. Again, Kālāmas, whatever I may have done, I have certainly done no evil, and I have not violated the customs of the world, either out of fear or without fear. I have always had compassion and empathy for the entire world. My mind has been free of contention with beings, untainted and delighted. Thus, Kālāmas, this is the fourth assurance, etc. In the Anguttara Nikaya version, the four assurances are somewhat different. The first is the same. The second assurance is that if there is no other world and no fruition of actions, then nevertheless in this life I am free from enmity and happy. The third assurance is that in case action causes evil, evil occurs through action, then at least I am not intending to do evil. And the fourth is, if no evil occurs through actions, then I am pure in both respects, that is, intention and action. The Madhyama-āgama version continues with the Kālāmas repeating the four assurances and going for refuge. So the main points where both discourses agree, pointing out the three roots of evil as being desire, hatred, and ignorance, and overcoming these evils to develop the four divine abodes. And this then results in four assurances, which are independent of various views. Yeah, we are right in time. I think I've given you, after a long break, quite a number of things to reflect on and discuss on the blog, from our entertaining creator God to the tricky passage in the Karajakāya-sutta, and now this disconcerting finding that our famous Kālāmas Sutta is not the crucial passage so often quoted, is not found in the Chinese Agama parallel. I suspect something went wrong with the Madhyama-āgama parallel, but I have no way of proving this. So I thank you very much for your attention and presence, and I look forward to continuing next week. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.